Welcome to the Forbidden Knowledge Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Carter, and in today's episode, we explore a concept whispered across mystic traditions, buried in esoteric texts, and quietly referenced by philosophers and psychics alike: the Akashic Records. Said to be an all-encompassing field that records every thought, action, and event in the universe, it is described as a kind of cosmic memory bank, a library beyond time. But if such a record truly exists, what does it say about the nature of reality itself? Are we individual beings making choices freely, or actors following a script already written in a universal archive? Is the universe conscious, and are we, perhaps unknowingly, tapping into its mind? In the ancient Sanskrit texts of India, the word Akasha referred not to a material element, but to the primordial substance from which all things arise. It was described as the fifth element, after earth, air, fire, and water, a boundless, all-penetrating ether that carried the vibration of every event in space and time. In Vedic philosophy, this Akasha was not empty space, but a living field of memory, a resonant backdrop to existence itself. Thousands of years later, mystics, yogis, and scholars would build upon this idea, suggesting that all knowledge, past, present, and potential futures, was inscribed into this invisible substrate. It was never a question of whether such a record existed, but rather whether the human mind could access it. The belief in an ethereal library predates modern science by millennia. In ancient Egypt, priests spoke of the halls of Amenti, hidden chambers that contained the secrets of the universe. In classical Greece, philosophers like Plato hinted at a higher realm of pure forms, where all ideas originated before manifesting in the physical world. And in the Hermetic traditions of Renaissance Europe, alchemists and initiates described a divine matrix where sacred knowledge was stored, guarded by angelic or otherworldly intelligences. But this wasn't merely symbolic or poetic language. In cultures as diverse as the Hopi, Zoroastrians, and Tibetan Buddhists, records of the universe's memory were not only believed to exist, but were actively sought after by initiates and seers. These seekers entered trance states, practiced elaborate rituals, or used psychoactive plants in attempts to pierce the veil and retrieve knowledge beyond their own lives. In Tibet, monks spoke of a space consciousness that could be accessed through deep meditation. Among Islamic mystics, the concept of al-Law al-Mahfuz, the preserved tablet, described a divine record that held every soul's fate and every unfolding event. The convergence of these traditions across continents and centuries points to something more than mere metaphor. The idea that knowledge is embedded in the fabric of the cosmos, rather than confined to the human brain, formed the bedrock of countless metaphysical systems. And it often came with warnings. Accessing such knowledge without preparation could be dangerous, even fatal. Only those who had purified themselves, who had undergone spiritual training, were thought capable of glimpsing these sacred archives without madness or misinterpretation. This reverence for the Akashic plane persisted even as empires rose and fell. While kings and conquerors concerned themselves with physical power, secret schools and spiritual orders preserved the techniques for tuning into the unseen. Among the theosophists of the 19th century, a movement that sought to blend Eastern philosophy with Western occultism, the Akashic Records emerged as a central doctrine. Helena Blavatsky, one of its most controversial figures, claimed to receive transmissions from ascended masters through this universal field. To her and her followers, the Akashic Records weren't just real. They were the source of all truth, obscured by centuries of dogma and institutional control. What began as whispers in the deserts of Egypt and chants in Himalayan monasteries now stood poised to collide with emerging ideas in modern science. As physics and consciousness studies edged towards stranger and less materialist explanations of reality, the possibility of a sentient, memory-bearing universe no longer seemed confined to mysticism. But long before those theories would emerge, the Akashic Records were already being carefully protected. Buried not beneath the earth, but beneath layers of disbelief, skepticism, and academic dismissal. In 1904, a little-known but deeply influential American clairvoyant named Edgar Cayce began to gain attention for his uncanny ability to diagnose illnesses, reveal past lives, and deliver profound spiritual teachings, all while in a self-induced trance state. What made Casey different from other psychics of his time wasn't just the depth of information he conveyed, but his repeated reference to a singular source, what he called the Akashic records. In over 14,000 documented sessions, Case claimed to access this vast archive beyond time and space to retrieve specific, personal information about individuals he had never met. Names, dates, ancestral details, even descriptions of lost civilizations, all were spoken while Case lay unconscious, eyes closed, his voice steady and devoid of performance. His subjects reported life-changing accuracy. But the real question wasn't whether Case was merely intuitive. It was, what exactly was he tuning into? The idea that human consciousness could interact with a field of information beyond the brain presented a threat to the materialist worldview that dominated the early 20th century. Casey's references to the Akashic records were dismissed by academics as mystical ramblings, unworthy of serious study. Yet his client list grew to include doctors, politicians, and industrialists, many of whom believed privately in what they couldn't publicly endorse. The more specific his readings became, the harder they were to ignore. Yet the scientific establishment never investigated his work with any real depth. His detailed references to forgotten histories and future timelines went against everything accepted by mainstream epistemology. So instead of debate, there was silence. That silence echoed across other instances of alleged Akashic access. In the late 20th century, a Brazilian woman named Marina Silva began recounting vivid memories of lives she had never lived, describing places she had never visited, down to the architecture, clothing, and language. Independent researchers would later confirm the historical accuracy of details she couldn't possibly have known. Similar stories surfaced from ordinary people across the globe, so particularly after near-death experiences or altered states of consciousness, often with recurring themes, an overwhelming flood of knowledge, a sensation of floating through layers of truth, and a profound emotional connection to all of existence. Many describe this encounter not as seeing a book or scroll, but as merging with something vast, an awareness so immense it could only be described as divine. Despite these testimonials, institutions remained resistant. Scientific funding did not flow to studies of non-local consciousness or anomalous cognition. University chairs in psychology and neuroscience avoided any association with the term Akashic, fearing the stigma of pseudoscience. The gatekeepers of knowledge, journals, tenure committees, and public education systems ensured that certain inquiries simply could not be pursued without professional ruin. To question the nature of consciousness itself was one thing. But to propose that the mind could interface with a cosmic record, to suggest that memory itself was a function of the universe, that was too dangerous. It is this combination of overwhelming anecdotal evidence and institutional denial that defines the forbidden nature of the Akashic records. Not only have they been experienced by mystics, psychics, and visionaries for centuries, but those who claim access are frequently marginalized or discredited, regardless of how compelling their information may be. Whether through fear, control, or genuine disbelief, the systems that shape our understanding of reality have chosen to bury these accounts. And in doing so, they may have hidden a fundamental truth about the nature of memory, consciousness, and the fabric of reality itself. In 2003, a quiet shift began to ripple through the world of theoretical physics. A British scientist named Rupert Sheldrake proposed a controversial idea he called morphic resonance, a hypothesis suggesting that memory is not stored in the brain, but in fields outside of space and time. According to Sheldrake, every thought, behavior, or biological pattern creates an imprint in an invisible field that future organisms can unconsciously tap into. Critics dismissed it as pseudoscience, yet its implications mirrored those of ancient mystics and Akashic seers. If true, it would mean that knowledge, instincts, and even habits aren't learned but remembered, from a kind of universal field where all experience accumulates. To believers in the Akashic records, Sheldrake wasn't speculating, he was catching up. In parallel, neuroscience began to encounter anomalies that standard models couldn't explain. Cases emerged of individuals with severely damaged or underdeveloped brains functioning normally, or even excelling intellectually. In one particularly baffling case, a man with only a fraction of the average brain volume was found to possess a near-genius level IQ and live a normal life. Medical scans left researchers dumbfounded. If memory and cognition were purely brain-based, such individuals should have exhibited severe impairments. But they didn't. Some quietly wondered if consciousness and memory might be non-local, that is, not confined to the physical brain at all. The Akashic model offered a radical but oddly consistent explanation. The brain isn't a storage device, but a receiver, like a radio dialed into a cosmic frequency. Beyond biology, technology has stumbled into strange territory. In the 1980s, remote viewing programs under the US government, particularly the now declassified Stargate project, began producing results that defied explanation. Trained individuals were able to describe distant locations, hidden military installations, and even events in the future with alarming accuracy. Officially, the project was terminated due to lack of utility. Unofficially, some of its findings remain classified. A number of former operatives would later speak openly about their experiences, claiming that they accessed information from what they could only describe as a field of consciousness, beyond time, beyond self, and eerily similar to the descriptions found in Akashic lore. There are also physical locations tied to this mystery. Certain megalithic sites like the Great Pyramids, Stonehenge, and the temples of Angkor Wat are believed by some to be placed along energy grids or ley lines, where Earth's electromagnetic field is particularly strong. These sites have long been associated with visions, spiritual insights, and altered states of consciousness. Could these sacred places act as amplifiers, gateways where the veil between mind and memory field thins? Researchers who have conducted electromagnetic and vibrational studies at these sites have recorded anomalous energy signatures. Some believe that the ancients built these monuments not just as tombs or temples, but as tuning devices, antennae meant to access the planetary memory. Even modern experiments in quantum physics lend strange support. Entangled particles separated by vast distances react simultaneously, suggesting that information can be shared across space without delay. This concept of non-locality deeply unnerves materialist science, but it mirrors what ancient traditions have claimed for centuries, that all things are connected through a field that transcends time and space. In this light, the Akashic records are not mystical nonsense. They are a poetic articulation of what quantum fields might truly be. Taken together, the evidence does not come from one place, one culture, or one era. It comes from the edges of science, the margins of medicine, the overlooked corners of spirituality, and the declassified shadows of government research. And though each strand is easily dismissed in isolation, their convergence paints a picture too coherent to ignore. If memory lives in the fabric of reality itself, then what we call the Akashic records may not be fantasy at all, but the very operating system of the universe. Across distant continents and disconnected eras, the architecture of belief has consistently pointed toward the same idea, that reality is not only observed but remembered. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerians believed in the Tablet of Destinies, a divine artifact said to hold the fate of all beings, past, present, and future. Its descriptions mirror the Akashic concept with uncanny precision. In ancient China, Taoist mystics spoke of the Tao as a flowing current of all-knowing presence, an eternal pattern into which human beings could tune with the right alignment of spirit and body. The Mayans developed a cyclical calendar system that tracked not only celestial events but human consciousness itself, as though time were an echo chamber of recurring lessons stored somewhere beyond our linear perception. Each civilization, separated by geography and language, referenced a hidden order, accessible to those who knew how to listen. The recurrence of this idea is not limited to spiritual doctrine. In sacred art and myth, we see consistent symbols that span cultures and continents. The spiral, an image found etched into rocks in Ireland, carved into temples in Peru, and woven into the iconography of Aboriginal Australia, is often interpreted as a symbol of evolution, energy, and eternal return. Could this represent an ancient understanding of the Akashic field's cyclical nature? The Eye of Providence, the Ouroboros, and the Tree of Life all reappear throughout the world with slight variations but deep structural similarities. These are not coincidences. They are linguistic remnants of a forgotten knowledge system, designed to be recognized across time by those who remember what to look for. Even linguistic roots hint at shared memory. In Sanskrit, the term smriti refers not to learned knowledge but remembered wisdom, a remembrance not of one's own experiences but of truths embedded in the soul. In the Dogon tribe of Mali, oral traditions speak of knowledge given by beings from the star system Sirius, information that included advanced astronomical facts unknown to modern science until the invention of high-powered telescopes. Such inexplicable bursts of knowledge hint at something deeper than folklore, a wellspring of memory that transcends individual learning. Mystics from Kabbalistic Judaism refer to the Book of Life, a divine ledger where every deed and intention is recorded. In Christian eschatology, it is this very book that is opened at the end of time to determine one's eternal fate. But what if this isn't metaphor? What if such references aren't symbolic teachings, but fragmented descriptions of a universally remembered truth? In shamanic traditions, practitioners often describe visions in which the natural world itself speaks, trees whispering stories, stones pulsing with memory, rivers unfolding narratives. To dismiss these experiences as hallucinations is to ignore the remarkable consistency with which they emerge across disparate human societies. Even cultures without written language pass down complex cosmologies through oral transmission, often preserving knowledge with stunning accuracy over thousands of years. How? Were they simply better storytellers, or were they tapping into something that remembered for them? The Akashic records, viewed this way, are not a dusty archive in the clouds. They are the living bloodstream of consciousness, coded into the very structure of existence, and accessed by ritual, resonance, and readiness. As this pattern reveals itself across time and geography, the weight of evidence becomes difficult to ignore. These aren't isolated myths, they're echoing fragments of a deeper design. A tapestry woven from truths too vast for any single culture to hold, yet too essential to ever fully vanish. In their persistence, these echoes speak not just of what was, but of what still is, quietly waiting to be remembered. When the modern academic world encountered claims of the Akashic records, it responded not with curiosity, but with calculated distance. Despite growing interest in consciousness studies and anomalous cognition, mainstream institutions placed strict boundaries around acceptable inquiry. The Akashic concept violated too many scientific taboos at once. It implied non-local consciousness, challenged brain-centric models of memory, and blurred the line between science and spirituality. To admit the possibility of such a field was to risk the foundations of academic orthodoxy, and so it remained on the fringes, dismissed without examination. Peer-reviewed journals rarely touched the subject. Graduate programs avoided it entirely. Researchers who hinted at similar theories couched their language in terms so abstract or technical that the core ideas were nearly unrecognizable. Careers were built on consensus, not curiosity. The invisible wall of academic respectability became a fortress, and the Akashic records remained on the outside, relegated to metaphysical bookshops and spiritual retreats rather than lecture halls and laboratories. Even within fields designed to explore the edges of human experience, parapsychology, transpersonal psychology, quantum consciousness, discussion of the Akashic field was often handled with hesitation. Researchers feared losing funding, publishing opportunities, or professional credibility. Some privately admitted interest, even belief, but publicly maintained silence. Conferences avoided the topic entirely. The very institutions founded to explore consciousness had become too fragile to confront its most challenging implications. The control mechanisms extended beyond academia. Public discourse, shaped by media and educational systems, reinforced the materialist worldview. From textbooks to television documentaries, the dominant narrative insisted that memory resides in neurons, that time is linear, and that knowledge is accumulated, not accessed. Anything that suggested otherwise was labelled pseudoscience or conspiracy theory. This wasn't just skepticism, it was gatekeeping, reinforced by ridicule and reinforced through repetition. Funding played a decisive role. Grants flowed to projects that aligned with pharmaceutical interests, technological development, and established models of cognition. But researchers proposing studies on non-local memory fields, consciousness beyond death, or the retrieval of past life knowledge found themselves without support. The institutions that claim to champion discovery often only support it within predefined boundaries. Anything outside those walls, even with compelling anecdotal or experimental backing, was dismissed before it could be explored. Media treatment followed suit. Programs that mentioned the Akashic records typically did so in a sensational or mocking tone, grouping the idea with fringe beliefs like Hollow Earth theory or Bigfoot sightings. This public framing discouraged serious engagement. It also prevented wider audiences from hearing about the deeper implications, the cross-cultural consistencies, and the scientific anomalies that suggested something far more profound was being ignored. Yet perhaps the most subtle form of denial comes in the guise of silence. Institutions don't need to attack ideas directly when they can simply ignore them into obscurity. Without platforms, without dialogue, without the legitimacy of inclusion, even the most compelling theories wither in the public mind. It is a quiet erasure, a form of intellectual censorship, not by decree but by design. In the end, it is not that the Akashic records have been disproven. It is that they have been disallowed, not because they lack evidence, but because they threaten a structure too invested in its own coherence. The walls built around academic and cultural knowledge are not impenetrable, but they are reinforced every day by fear, pride, and the quiet pressure to conform. And so a mystery that could redefine our understanding of reality remains buried in plain sight, everywhere and nowhere at once. While official channels dismiss the Akashic records as mystical fantasy, a growing undercurrent of researchers, visionaries, and independent thinkers have dared to explore what institutional science refuses to touch. Their theories vary in detail but share a striking common thread: the belief that consciousness is not confined to the brain, and that reality may be a projection from a deeper, information-rich substrate. One of the most provocative among them is the simulation hypothesis, the idea that our universe is a kind of program, and that the Akashic records are not mythic archives, but literal data storage within the system. In this framework, every action, thought, and experience is encoded, retrievable, and part of a larger computational structure designed by an unknown intelligence. Others propose that the Akashic field is tied not to artificial intelligence, but to a living planetary consciousness. This perspective echoes the Gaia hypothesis, which suggests that Earth functions as a single, self-regulating organism. If so, could the Akashic records be the memory bank of this planetary being? Some theorists claim that ancient cultures had access to this consciousness through ritual, architecture, and resonance. Sacred geometry, mantras, and specific temple alignments weren't symbolic, they were technological. By vibrating at certain frequencies or aligning with celestial events, initiates could tune themselves into the larger memory field and download knowledge far beyond their cultural or temporal context. Still more radical are the interdimensional interpretations. In this view, the Akashic records exist in a higher dimension, accessible not through machines or equations, but through states of altered consciousness. Practices such as deep meditation, astral projection, and entheogenic rituals are said to bypass the filters of the physical brain and allow direct contact with non-human intelligences who act as gatekeepers to the records. These entities are described not as gods, but as archivists, beings whose sole purpose is to preserve and transmit the accumulated experience of sentient life across time and space. Whether these are advanced extraterrestrials, hyperdimensional beings, or aspects of the human oversoul remains a matter of speculation. Some even suggest that DNA itself may be a biological interface with the Akashic field. The so-called junk DNA, long dismissed by mainstream science as evolutionary debris, could in fact serve as an antenna, receiving and transmitting information encoded in the quantum fabric of the universe. This would explain ancestral memories, intuitive insights, and even sudden creative genius as moments of resonance with the records. If true, this would make every human a living node in a vast conscious network, a walking library connected to a field of infinite depth. Across these fringe theories, one unsettling question keeps surfacing. If this information is accessible, why don't we all remember? One possibility is that our current culture, through noise, distraction, and chemical interference, has dulled our natural connection to the field. Fluoride in water, electromagnetic pollution, and sensory overstimulation may not just harm the body, they may disrupt the vibratory clarity required to access deeper states of consciousness. What ancient initiates achieved through discipline and sacred practice, modern society drowns in digital static. Whether these ideas represent spiritual metaphor, emerging science, or a mixture of both, they speak to a larger hunger, a search for meaning that materialist models have failed to satisfy. The Akashic records, viewed through this speculative lens, are not relics of superstition, but glimpses of a hidden architecture, one that connects every thought, every life, and every moment to a vast, conscious system designed to remember. Not just for the sake of memory, but for the evolution of something far greater than we've been allowed to imagine. Throughout history, knowledge that threatened dominant power structures has been systematically erased, mischaracterized, or hidden. The concept of the Akashic records is no exception. It is not simply a fringe idea left to mystics. It is a target of erasure by institutions that profit from ignorance. When knowledge is distributed equally, power becomes decentralized. But when access to knowledge is controlled, those who hold the keys shape not only what we know, but who we become. In this light, the suppression of the Akashic concept reveals something more than skepticism. It reveals design. Religious institutions were among the first to seize control over memory and truth. The early Christian Church destroyed thousands of texts during the Council of Nicaea and subsequent purges, choosing which scriptures to canonize and which to declare heretical. Among those lost were writings from Gnostic sects that spoke of divine knowledge accessible from within, not from a priest or an institution, but directly through the soul. These teachings often referenced a universal source of truth and memory, eerily reminiscent of the Akashic idea. The Gnostics were not merely silenced. They were wiped from history, their libraries burned, their names demonized. In Islam, early Sufi mystics wrote of the Law Mahfuz, a protected tablet upon which all that has happened and will happen is inscribed. But as orthodox interpretations solidified, these mystical traditions were often sidelined or persecuted. In Judaism, Kabbalistic teachings hinted at an inner architecture of the universe where memory, intention, and divine code were interwoven. Yet these teachings were confined to secret circles, protected by oaths and obscured from the public eye. Even in more recent history, governments and intelligence agencies have played a role in burying the implications of universal memory. Declassified CIA documents reveal long-term research into extrasensory perception, remote viewing, and consciousness fields. But much of this work remains heavily redacted or quietly shelved. Programs like MKUltra, while infamous for their abuses, also explored the boundaries of human awareness, often with the goal of controlling it rather than understanding it. In these programs, the line between exploration and exploitation vanished. Any discovery that pointed toward autonomous consciousness or spiritual liberation was either weaponized or erased. The educational system, shaped by industrial needs and state priorities, further ensures that certain questions are never asked. Children are taught facts, not inquiry. The idea that knowledge might come from within, or that history is incomplete by design, is absent from curricula. Universities reinforce this by tethering truth to career survival. Professors who drift too far from accepted doctrine are denied tenure, blacklisted from journals, and pushed into academic exile. The message is clear: stay within the lines or disappear. And then there are the secret societies, organizations like the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, and other less visible groups who have long claimed to safeguard ancient wisdom. Many of these orders trace their origins to ancient Egypt, Babylon, or the early mystery schools of Greece. Their rituals and symbols hint at a deeper knowledge of consciousness and cosmic memory, encoded in allegory. While public explanations of their practices remain vague, insiders often allude to truths that must be protected from misuse. The very existence of such secrecy begs the question: what knowledge are they hiding, and why? When we view the suppression of the Akashic records in this context, a disturbing pattern emerges. This is not accidental neglect or mere academic oversight. It is a strategic forgetting, a carefully engineered amnesia. Whether orchestrated by religious empires, state agencies, or elite networks, the goal remains the same: to keep humanity disconnected from its origin, its potential, and its power. The Akashic records, if real, represent not just memory, but freedom. And freedom is the one thing those in control cannot allow us to truly access. If the Akashic records exist, if there truly is a field of consciousness that stores every thought, action, and possibility, then the implications stretch far beyond the spiritual. They challenge the foundations of science, religion, history, and psychology. The very way we define human identity begins to unravel. In a world where memory isn't housed in the brain, but in the fabric of the cosmos, individuality becomes a function of perception, not isolation. Every mind becomes a window, not a container, through which the universe observes and remembers itself. This reframes our concept of death. If consciousness interfaces with a universal field, then what we call dying may not be the end of awareness, but a transition of access. Memories don't vanish, they return to the source. The concept of reincarnation, found in traditions from Hinduism to indigenous belief systems across the globe, suddenly gains a new layer of meaning. Past life memories, spontaneous recall of unknown languages, or unexplained emotional imprints may be less about a migrating soul and more about entanglement with a timeless archive. The Akashic records offer a metaphysical model in which identity is both personal and collective, a soul that is unique yet inseparable from the whole. Even ethics transform under this lens. If every action, intention, and thought is recorded, not judged by an external deity, but imprinted into the very structure of reality, then morality becomes cosmic accountability. Karma, rather than being enforced by divine punishment, operates as a kind of vibrational consequence. Harm, love, truth, deception, each leaves a trace that echoes beyond the moment. In this view, we do not act in isolation, and nothing is ever truly forgotten. We are writing not only our own stories, but entries in a book that shapes the evolution of consciousness itself. It also forces a re-examination of genius. What we label as brilliance, an artist's vision, a scientist's breakthrough, a child's prodigious ability, might be less about exceptional biology and more about resonance. Those we call gifted may simply have clearer access to this field, better attunement to the records. Their insights come not from invention, but from retrieval. Ideas aren't created, they're remembered. The Akashic model dissolves the myth of originality and replaces it with the possibility of universal co-authorship. At a societal level, the consequences are even more radical. Systems built on the premise of scarcity, of knowledge, talent, wisdom, begin to fracture. Education would no longer be about transferring data, but about training awareness. Healing would involve not just treating symptoms, but uncovering energetic imprints held in the field. Conflict resolution would require understanding karmic patterns across lifetimes or histories, now accessible through trained interface with the records. Entire institutions, legal, medical, governmental, would have to reorient around the existence of a remembered reality that cannot be manipulated, hidden, or rewritten. And perhaps most unsettling of all, the illusion of separation collapses. If the Akashic records store all experience, then every human being is connected not metaphorically, but literally. Your story is not just yours. It is nested within everyone else's, part of a web so intricate that the fate of one inevitably affects the fate of all. The division between self and other, past and future, even mind and matter, begins to dissolve. We are each pages in the same book, written in different ink perhaps, but bound by the same spine. To accept this is to let go of certainty. It is to step beyond the safety of materialism and into the unknown, where truth is no longer a matter of consensus, but of alignment. The Akashic records do not simply change how we think, they change what we are. And in doing so, they reveal a haunting, exhilarating possibility, that we are not alone in the universe, not just because others may exist, but because we are the universe, remembering itself, one thought at a time. If we are indeed part of a conscious universe that stores every whisper of thought and ripple of action, then our lives take on a meaning far deeper than anything conventional history, science, or religion has dared to offer. In a reality shaped by resonance and memory, every word spoken in love or in anger becomes more than a fleeting moment. It becomes part of the architecture of existence. The Akashic records, if they are real, suggest that nothing is ever truly lost. Every injustice, every act of courage, every forgotten truth continues to echo in the unseen layers of the cosmos, waiting to be heard again. This is perhaps why the idea remains so persistently buried. If humanity knew, truly understood, that it could access the blueprint of all that ever was and all that ever could be, the foundations of control would erode overnight. There would be no more need for priests to mediate divinity, no more gatekeepers of knowledge, no more reliance on authorities to dictate what is possible. Each person would become their own seeker, their own prophet, their own recorder of cosmic history. Such a shift would not be evolution, it would be revolution. And revolutions, as history has shown, are not welcomed by those in power. But the records do not ask for belief. They do not require temples or doctrine. They do not need a name. Whether called Akasha, the Book of Life, morphic resonance, or quantum memory fields, the essence remains the same. The knowledge is there. It always has been. The question is whether we will allow ourselves to remember, whether we will quiet the noise, shed the imposed identities, and listen for that deeper signal, the one that speaks not in words, but in recognition, the feeling that we've been here before, that we already know, that something sacred has been waiting patiently for our return. In every dream that feels more real than waking, in every coincidence that shakes the soul, in every moment of profound knowing we cannot explain, there is a doorway, a subtle invitation to rejoin the truth we were taught to forget. The Akashic records are not fantasy. They are not superstition. They are the consequence of a reality far more intelligent, interconnected, and intentional than we've been allowed to imagine. The suppression of this knowledge has not destroyed it. It has only delayed its rediscovery. And now, in an age of collapsing paradigms and accelerating awakenings, the veil grows thin. The records are no longer distant echoes. They are knocking at the walls of consensus reality, asking to be read once more. Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of the Forbidden Knowledge podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show, subscribe to the Forbidden Knowledge podcast on Spotify. Subscribe now.